welcome to the Newburyport Literary Festival. This is the third virtual and 17th annual festival. My name is Leslie Hendrickson and I am on the steering committee. Welcome and thanks again for being here. The brand new books that we're about to talk about, which include Summer of Bitter and Sweet, written by Jen Ferguson, who is Metis and white, an activist, a feminist, an auntie, and an accomplice armed with a PhD. She believes writing, teaching, and beating are political acts. Her debut YA novel, The Summer of Bitter and Sweet, again, is forthcoming from Heartdrum HarperCollins on May 10th, so just 1 week away. And Grace K. Shim, who is the author of the Noh Family, grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma as one of two Korean Americans at her high school. Her sister was the other. Grace writes books with the Korean American protagonists that she wished she had read about as a teen. She lives with her husband and 3 children in the San Francisco Bay Area. The Noh Family is her first novel, and you can find her on Twitter at Grace Misplaced One and on Instagram at GK Shim Writes. So thank you both and welcome. We're excited to have you here. And congratulations on your debut novels, which are days from publication. And that is obviously such a huge milestone for any writer. So again, congratulations. So because these books are not out yet, we just assume that no one has read them. So Grace, why don't we start with you? Could you just give us a synopsis of your book, please?
Yeah, I'll just give you the quick pitch. The Noh Family is about a girl who takes a 23andMe test and discovers that she's related to a wealthy family, a secret wealthy family in Seoul, Korea. And her journey kind of begins there. She gets whisked away to meet them. And I think for her, this story is a coming of age story about finding family and what kind of family that looks like, whether it's related by DNA or found family. Yeah.
Amazing. Jen?
So I've learned that I am really, really bad at giving the one sentence pitch for The Summer of Bitter and Sweet. And I just got my excuse why recently. I had a trade review and it said something like, Ferguson deals with so many different things in this book that it could have been 4 or 5 books. And I'm like, that's my excuse. There's a lot going on here. But the starter pitch, the way to get you in, is that Lou is 18 years old, has just graduated high school, and she is having a tumultuous summer before university, working for her family's struggling ice cream business and dealing with a person who she never wanted to be part of her life, her white father, who's recently been released from prison and wants to have a relationship with her.
Those are good synopsises.
Oh, yay.
And no spoilers. So the next obvious follow-up question is, what was the inspiration for these books? Why did you decide to write about a struggling ice cream shop and a tortured family situation? Start with you, Jen.
This is a long story, and this one is more like a writerly story. So I have been writing since I was 16. I was the teenager who stayed up late in her basement bedroom writing novels, which you'll never find. They have all been deleted and destroyed because they were really, really bad. But then what happened is I had written a number of novels and I kept querying agents and getting this is lovely, or you write a really beautiful story, but I don't know how to sell this, or I don't think there's a market for this. And what happened was I started writing adult literary fiction. When I transitioned to YA, I was writing speculative YA. And at one point I was like, what do I do next? Or should I keep writing? And I was talking to an author friend of mine. Her name is Jamie Paxton. She writes YA contemporary. Her most recent is called Lucky Girl. And she has a forthcoming YA fantasy called The Vermilion Emporium coming out later this year. And Jamie said something to me like, well, Jen, why don't you write about the stuff that you've been talking about recently, like coming to terms with being Métis and white, starting to recognize your sexuality and what it means to be demisexual. And I said, all right, I can do this. I can do this. And I wrote a first chapter and I was like, it's going to be a summer romance. It's going to be super cute. It's going to be between a Métis teen and a Black teen. And I was like, it's going to be so much fun. They're just going to play on the prairies all day long. It'll be great. And I got to the end of the first chapter and it turned really dark. And I was like, I can't write this. And I put it aside for a couple of years. So then I'm in France. I'm at a writer's retreat. I'm working on another YA speculative book and I hit a wall, like a really hard wall. And I picked up that first chapter and the rest of the novel just like flowed. I was finally ready to like embrace the darker side of the story.
It's so interesting how you wrote one chapter and then kind of, it sounds like it wasn't exactly getting stuck, but that you couldn't quite move forward with it at that point. And then 2 years later or so, it just all came together. That
I don't think I was emotionally ready when I started writing it, because this book, it really is dealing with a lot of my own personal trauma. And I was like, too close, back off. But 2 years later, I felt better.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, that speaks a little bit to sometimes how we can't read a book right now, but then 5 years we can read it because we're more emotionally ready. I also wanted to ask you a somewhat naive question from an American audience. We have a mostly American audience here. Can you describe your heritage for us, please?
Yeah, of course. So the Métis are one of Canada's distinct Indigenous peoples. We have First Nations, Inuit, and the Métis. The Métis are a group of people who are generally the product of European fur traders who came to Canada and then married mostly Cree women. And instead of the European culture overseeding the Cree culture, what they did is they made a hybrid of their two cultures. So the language of the Métis Michif is mostly Cree verbs and sentence structures plus French nouns. So when you hear it spoken, if you understand French, you'll be like, well, I know that word. But you won't understand the verbs and the sentence structure around it. So these groups devised a new culture and moved forward as a distinct independent people. So I'm Métis on my dad's side, and then my mom is a white settler whose family has been in Canada for 5 or 6 generations.
Thank you. So Grace, what was your inspiration for the Noh family?
Well, it's interesting that you were saying that you weren't ready. I mean, this is not for the Noh family, but I mean, I think all writers might have a similar experience with a story that they want to write, but are not ready to write. And I was kind of at that stage with a different story that I was writing. It was a young adult novel that was really close to me. I think it was too close to me, and I just didn't have, I was processing at the time. And I was just struggling to get it on paper. I knew it was a good story in concept and theory, but I couldn't write it. And just like you, Jen. So I felt like a lot of similarities there. And then the pandemic happened and I was struggling to write, just revise it. It had gone through the querying process. I had gotten a couple of R&Rs. And, by that point, I have been looking at this, trying to fix it for a year. And I was like, I just don't want, throw in a pandemic and you just don't want to write it anymore, So it was a little bit tough. Times. I have 3 kids that are doing homeschooling, who were doing homeschooling. And in the early stages, Jen, I think you're a teacher, so you might, were you a teacher? Yeah, so you might know how the early stages of the pandemic went, which is awful. So the kids were just whatever. My sister happened, that the Thanksgiving before on a Black Friday sale, she bought a 23andMe kit. because it was a buy one, get one free. Why not? Right. Not that we needed it. We certainly didn't need to take this DNA test. So she just took it for fun. And so happened, everything shut down and we went to go see her because, nothing else was happening in Southern California. And we went down there and she had just told me, she said, that 23andMe test, somebody reached out and I have no idea who this person is. And so it's, and I'm a contemporary writer. So everything I write is going to be from something I've experienced in some way, shape, or form. And I'll be honest, I did not want to write this book, but literally as we were trying, I really did not, because I was like, no, this is not what I'm writing. I'm totally trying to write this other book that's a little bit more serious. And then this is all happening. And, it's just, there were 2 days where we did not know what our relationship was. And it was those two, you'll be surprised at how many stories you can spin on like who this person is. And I think that's where my creative mind took off. And there was a lot of Korean drama watching as well during the pandemic. So it just combined into this lovely, the story just wrote itself. And I didn't want to write it, but everyone told me, you have to write this story. You have to write this story. So I set it aside for my other one aside for a little bit. And then I wrote this story and it really just, I was so motivated to write it. It came out in about a month and then I revised it in a month. And I'm only telling you this not to like brag or anything like that, but it's because it's like, no, it's not that at all. It's because this is like probably the one and only time that will ever happen. And I think it's just because that story it literally was, I caught lightning in a jar and it just, and took off with it. And then kind of like what you were saying with your debut, Jen, the other one I went back to and I just was, I think I needed that time to process, step away from it. And I was able to write it after that. So I think, yeah, anyways, and you'll see with my book too, like there's nothing that I don't draw from my personal experience. So quite literally the inception of the Noh Family was from me my sister taking a 23andMe test.
That's amazing that you were resisting writing it, and then suddenly once you did, it all came out in one. Yeah. Basically sounds like one fell swoop. A month to write a novel is basically right. Not stopped.
It's unheard of.
Elizabeth Gilbert tells a similar story about how that one time that happened to her where she had a dream, she wrote out this short story, and it never happened again, where it was just like so seamless. And in fact, all these critics came back to her and this isn't like anything you've ever written before, but it's just because she had this big magic moment. That's what she calls it, as you may know.
Yes, this is likely my one and only. I'm just saying.
That was her experience, but it may not be yours. Who knows? Can't tell the future. So on my last panel, I talked to two mystery novelists, Brendan Slocum and Grace Lee, who come out with brilliant books this year. But they both said to me that they were potentially going to be YA books at the beginning. And so I wonder if you thought that your books might be something else, or were you YA from the beginning, and why YA?
Ooh, yeah. For me, I finished a PhD in English and creative writing, and it kind of made me hate books, and particularly certain kinds of books pretty hard. And I went through like a strong depressive episode, and YA is what got me out of it. So this is like back in 2016. And I sort of discovered that the YA of now was not the YA of my childhood, which was like the Babysitter's Club, end of list.
No shade on the Babysitter's Club, Jen.
No shade. Just like that was what I could have. So, I discovered YA. I consumed a lot of it that first year. My library and I were in communication daily about books that were on hold that I needed to go and pick up. So when I started writing again and I realized that I could find some joy writing YA, I haven't gone back in terms of novels. I do write short stories and essays that are for an adult audience, but I haven't gone back yet to writing an adult novel. I just can't seem to do it. So The Summer of Bitter and Sweet, it was always meant to be YA. Grace, what about you?
Yeah, I started with YA because I actually like fell back as an adult reader back into the love of reading with YAs basically,
Yeah.
because I think they just conjure up those big feelings that you have, in those formative years. Like everything's such a big deal. And it's like, I'm a parent now, so everything's kind of not a big deal anymore. So it was nice to kind of revisit that through books. And it just really reminded me of how much growth emotionally young adults go through at that age, and how much books help to unpack a lot of that, a lot of those emotions. So that's kind of where I was drawn to, because I felt like the biggest stories were there. And I did find a little bit of a challenge when I came up with, when I was writing the Noh Family, because as you know, like DNA, it's like really tricky. She has to be old enough to be able to take this test without having parental consent, and, all these things. And it has to be old enough to go across, to the new country unsupervised. So 18 was probably like the limit I could go. And that really dictated a lot of where the story was going to start. She had to be graduating, there were all these contingencies, because the YAs that I had been working with before were a little younger, in that they weren't seniors, they were 16, 17. So it really did dictate that. In the future, I do hope to write some adult, but I think for this story, because it was about found family, it was about searching for family, it was about feeling like she was left behind. There was a lot of those unresolved coming of age feelings. It needed to be YA. So that was kind of my the predicament that I was in at that point.
Yeah, I'm thinking of your like big feelings moment, and how teens have so many big feelings and so many things are happening in their lives at the same time, that there's my dog showing up and saying hi Nixon. So many things are happening in their lives at the same time, that when we become adults, we forget what it was like to have so many things happening at the same time. So that's one of the reasons why I'm writing YA, is because I can write a book where so many things are happening at the same time, and we can still get to a conclusion or a resolution at the end. And as a kid and a teen, I didn't have that. I read Anne Rice's Belinda at like 12 or 13. And if anyone knows that book, that was probably a mistake for my like formative development. I like went there way too early, but that's because I was searching for something that would give me like big feels and would allow me to explore the world safely from like my couch with a book. So I think that like that's what we get to do in YA now. We get to explore the world safely through the book.
Right. Interesting. So Grace, you were talking about families, and that's definitely something I wanted to touch on. Both of you write a lot about families, and earlier you were saying, that so much is based on your own life. So how are you approaching writing families, and how are you synthesizing experiences in your own lives without making that obvious to the other people who were involved in those experiences, aka your families?
Ooh, that's tricky.
Well, it's a tricky thing to do, I think. So
yeah, there's certainly I'm sorry if I'll go ahead if you don't mind, Jen, but there are certainly some characters in my book that are are based off of characters who family members who I can safely say will probably never read my book. And I think that gave me a lot of comfort in knowing, hey, they're not going to write me out of the family. It'll be fine. They won't, it won't be awkward at that next family meeting. But, and it definitely was tricky because I think I had to make obviously it's not like a good versus evil type of book, but there has to be something that she's stacked up against. And for Chloe, my main character, it had to be her family, some of her family members, right? And so I do feel incredibly guilty for doing that, because even though a lot of it was based on things that I had witnessed or felt or seen growing up, I think that their place where they came from was so complex, right? Like they are like that for a reason. They're not bad human beings, or in general, like, especially because I was writing about people from a different culture. I'm Korean heritage, but I didn't grow up in Korea. So there's a clear distinction between people who grew up in Korea and people who are Korean American. So writing that was a little bit tricky as well, because I didn't want to misrepresent anyone. And I also didn't want to make it feel like my lived experience is it's going to be everybody's experience, with this marginalized, representation. So it was a little bit tricky to try to do all of that, but I think combining personalities and putting them in, you know what I mean? Like hiding it in ways that are not as obvious is one thing. And then also having characters that don't look like my family, having them have personalities of people who are not just, main characters or whatnot, or don't look like them, or opposite gender. That really helps as well. But in order to make them authentic, I do have to write people or things, or experiences that I felt myself. So I do think that is a tricky balance, writing about family.
Jen, your thoughts?
Ooh, so I think that composite characters, which is a term that I often use when I'm teaching creative nonfiction. I'm like, yeah, you're writing from real life, but you're also allowed to not like write your family straight as your family. You're allowed to like take two people and turn them into one, or like build a composite character. With fiction, we're kind of we're going to assume we've done that. But you do know that anyone in your life who reads your book, the first thing they start looking for is like them in your book. And I'm like, fiction, I made this up. You might see some of the real world like bubbling in, but I really did make it up. In terms of family, so like Lou's mom is super traumatized. Even 18 years after Lou's birth, and Lou's mom takes off to sell her beadwork on the powwow circuit and is pretty much empty for most of the novel. And Lou's uncles step in. So like I adore my aunts and uncles. I have lots of aunts and uncles, and Lou has two uncles. So like I've taken parts of the people I love and filtered them into those characters because I love Lou's uncles. Like they are really wonderful people, and they're the kind of family that you want your kid to have. But like they don't translate directly to one of my uncles, or like a gender flipped one of my aunts. They're just like, they're people I love, and I want the readers to love them. So I've taken things from the people around me that I love. Like my dad is a really great human, and the dad in The Summer of Bitter and Sweet is a trash human. So like my dad's never going to read that book. He did read it. We can talk about my dad reading my book story later, but like he's never going to read it and go like, why did you make me so horrible? Because it's clearly fiction. The dad in the book is a trash human.
Right. Well, my follow-up question was going to be, have any of your family members read these books yet? I know they're still on their way to bookstores, and have they had any reactions to them, to the characters?
You want to go first, Grace? Or
Sure. Well, my first reader was my sister, actually, because obviously this was happening to both of us. And, I mentioned it in my acknowledgements, but, she's not she and I are very different, but we're very close. It's weird, but that's the way it is. And she is not a reader, and she doesn't read for pleasure of her own. This is her own admission. And so when she read my first few chapters, she told me, it's not that bad, actually. I took that as a compliment. And I did run with it. And there were some points where she was like, that's a little too on the nose. And, you know, I did feel sometimes I had to defend my, some of the things that the reasons why I did what I did. But also with story, the complex thing, like you were saying, to go back a little bit, sorry about the whole bringing your family in, but to go along with what you were saying is that, like, with the story, there's still structure and there's still craft involved. And so I think I start out with, like, here are the characters I need for this journey to happen. And then, like, a lot of my family stuff will filter into there, kind of like what you were saying, Jen. So I think sometimes my sister would pick up on something and be like, this is exactly this, you know, she would know who it was. But aside from that, I don't think it would be that clear to anybody else. I am a little nervous about no, I'm not nervous about my parents reading. I just don't think, I guess I'm nervous that they won't read it. You know what I mean? I'll be like, oh, you don't want to, it's not good enough for you to read. No. So I do hope they'll read it. They know it's a work of fiction. And I hope they'll be, you know, entertained by it more than anything.
I told my parents their job was to buy a copy of the book, but I didn't care if they ever read it. It would be just fine if it ended up on the bookshelf and never left the bookshelf. And my dad, when I got ARCs, was like, you're sending me one, right? And I was like, okay, fine. Like, you want it as a collector's item? Because my dad jokes that one day these things are going to be worth money. And he keeps trying to sell, like, my products to the neighbors for, like, extra money because I've touched them. My dad's a big jokester. So my dad gets the ARC, and he's turned into a reader since he's retired, but my dad is like a sci-fi fantasy reader, not a contemporary YA reader. But he read my book, and, like, he got about halfway through and updated me, and he was like, well, I found some typos and I found a word that I think you misused. I was like, Dad, it's an ARC, it's not quite finished yet. Like, I love you, but I'm sure we caught those things. And he goes, well, I'll send you an email with them anyways. And he did. And then maybe like a week and a half later, we're on a phone call. Like, I live in Los Angeles. My family lives in Nova Scotia, Canada. So much, much closer to all of you who are in Massachusetts. And he said this, he goes, I finished your book, pause. And then he goes, I finished Mike Mame's like third trilogy in his military sci-fi, and that was really good. And then he, like, stopped talking, and I was like, Dad, but like, that's exactly what it is. Like, he finished my book, and I'm proud of him for reading it. There's a lot of, like, again, this was kind of a personal book for me, so, like, there's a lot of stuff in there that I don't know if I needed to tell my dad. But I'm so glad he enjoyed the military science fiction trilogy, and you know, like, because that's up his alley. So he read it. My mom is now reading it, but she reads very slowly, so we'll see what happens.
All right. So just a reminder to the audience, please feel free to ask questions. You can put those in the Q&A. But I'm going to shift gears a little and ask about your publishing journeys. Obviously, your debut authors, we've talked about that. And it can be an arduous process to get an agent and get a book actually out in the world. And look, now we have 2 books out in the world. So please tell me how that happened. Grace, can I start with you?
Sure. Like I said, you know, earlier, I was clearing out another book, and I was working on that, and I was about to go out again. I was revising it, thinking that I would go out on to query again. And then this came very quickly. And I think what really helped move it along even faster was DV Pit was, I think, in October. So as soon as I wrote it, I participated in DV Pit. And that is an online pitch event for querying, querying authors and marginalized, I should say, querying authors. And it's an amazing space, and a lot of agents do participate. And I was very fortunate to have a lot of interest in my my pitch. So that was an amazing process that really went I mean, I was querying for months. and I had a bunch of rejections with my other one, and then this one just was like boom, boom, boom. So I mean, like I said, I think it wasn't anything in particular that I did with this novel. I think it was a classic case of right time, right place. I got my agent. I signed with her the day before Thanksgiving or the day of Thanksgiving. I can't remember. And then we revised it a little bit back and forth. And then we went out in February. And again, that went really quickly as well. I got an offer a couple weeks later. And honestly, it was that, okay. So I feel like maybe I'm not representing publishing very accurately.
So don't worry, I will. I will.
Okay, I was like, please just know I have suffered a lot leading up to this. So all of this is like not typical. I acknowledge that. And I'm very, very grateful for the experience I've had. But let it be known, I did have many tears, many rejections, and it was really, really harrowing. And I only bring this up because, you know, when you get an offer from an editor while you're on submission, usually the process for your book from offer to publication is about 2 years. And mine just happened to be a year and a half. So that as well went really quickly too. So my whole entire process was very quick. Needless to say, it was a very steep learning curve as well. You know, and I think being a part of a debut group, which is where I met Jen, has been really great, you know, but it also can be really hard. Yeah, it's a mixed bag of emotions. I'll just tell you that. And a lot of people wonder why it takes so long for a book to come out, but it just does. That's just the process, you know, it just does. And I will tell you, there are periods of, it's like rush, you know, like we need this by this, we need this by then. And so it's a lot of me rereading my entire manuscript within a matter of 2 weeks and revising it or whatnot. And then 2 months of like nothing. And in the meantime, I'm sure there's stuff going on in the back end, but me as an author, as a debut author, we don't hear anything. And I think it's during those times where it can be a little bit like imposter syndrome will start to settle in, and you'll start to ask yourself, did this really happen? Did I really write a book? Is this really coming out? And a lot of doubt starts creeping in. So there's a lot of management of your own like fears and expectations and you know, the voices in your head and all that stuff. So I think for me, it's been a little atypical. It's been a lot of rush, some silence, rush, some silence, and a lot of emotions. Of it's like that, you know, the pulse monitor. It really is. It's just this and that and this and that and this and that. So, and then I'll let Jen explain how hers went.
Yeah, I just wanted to interject. It's such a, you know, I wonder if, you know, the phrase the debut writer is really a misnomer. I feel like this also came up in my last panel, you know, the lifelong writers who have, you know, 1 or 2 books that didn't come to light, but this is the first thing that they had published. And both Brendan and Grace from the last one were like, oh yeah, this after nothing, years of nothing or years of trying and blah, 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 and then it happened so fast. It all exploded. So right place, right time, right book.
Yeah.
Luck
absolutely.
and timing.
Yeah.
It's really luck and timing. So whenever a younger writer, and I don't mean young in age, I mean like young in their process of being a writer, comes to me and they're like, what advice do you have for aspiring writers? I'm like, well, first off, cross out aspiring, but like, okay, let's go. My advice is that you have to be persistent and you have to fuel yourself up to be persistent. So you have to take care of yourself really, really well, because this business won't take care of you. And really it's about luck and timing, because almost everyone who's querying a book is talented, right? Like talent isn't the problem, luck and timing are. And I have been notoriously unlucky up until a point. And I've also had apparently terrible timing. So The Summer of Bitter and Sweet is my 7th finished novel. Like some of them were adult literary, some of them were like YA speculative, but I wrote a lot. And I queried Patricia Nelson, who is my agent, like probably 4 times before I queried her with this book. And every time she'd be like, these are beautiful. It's just, this isn't the right book. Send me your next book. And I really listened and I sent her my next book. and The Summer of Bitter and Sweet was the right book. I had a phone call. Patricia said, hey, can we have a phone call? And I was like, finally, it's happening. I was like in Vegas, like the week before. I was in Vegas visiting with my family, which is really, it's a weird place to go with your family. And this is like 3 days before the pandemic hits the US and before we start shutting things down. So I was fielding, and I got tons of agent offers after that. I think I had like 5 or 6 other agents who wanted to jump in and offer to represent this book. In the end, Patricia is 100% the right agent for me. I love her to death. And then I revised with Patricia, and that went pretty quickly. And here's where my story becomes atypical. We put together a sub list. There were maybe 10 or 12 names on that sub list. We sent it around on a Thursday afternoon. By Friday, everyone on the list wanted to read the book. By Monday, we had people being like, I'm reading, it's excellent. By Wednesday, I had a call with Rosemary Brosnan, a video call from Heartdrum, and we had a nice chat. By like Thursday, I had a preempt offer in my mailbox. And it was something like, you have to respond to us in the next 3 hours. And it was a really, really excellent offer. Heartdrum was the right place for this book. I also love Rosemary to death. And Patricia did some negotiation and like got the offer bumped up financially. And it was already a lovely author. And
It's worked for
like
an agent. Good. That's what you need your agent for.
Yeah. So like I walked away after about a week on submission with a 6-figure 2-book deal with the absolute right imprint. And that is not typical of the process at all. Like those are the outliers, the people who are like, oh, I went on submission and sold my book in a week. That does not happen. Most of my friends have been on submission for like 5 to 10 to 20 weeks. Some of them have been on submission for a year and a half. It's luck and timing the whole way down the line. Since The Summer of Bitter and Sweet is also the first YA out from Heartdrum, my production timeline was also more like a year and a half than the typical 2 or 2.5 years to production. So that's the other atypical thing for me.
I also want to talk to you both about representation in YA and why that's so important, but I think a good segue into that might be a little more information about Heartdrum, which has a mission to get to this issue. So can you talk about that, Jen?
So what I've noticed, particularly in YA publishing over the last couple of years, is we'll have imprints pop up and they will like have a very particular mission to publish books by authors of particular backgrounds for readers of particular backgrounds specifically, not that any other reader isn't welcome to dive in. So Heartdrum publishes Native authors who write middle grade picture books and YA, particularly for Indigenous teens. So they have that mission in place, which is about more representation. It's really in terms of like what representation is out there for Indigenous peoples. It's so much of it's in the past. It's like Little House on the Prairies. And that is like what Indigenous teens get to see of themselves is being portrayed in a very specific, very negative way. So Heartdrum is like, no, we deserve stories where Indigenous teens and kids get to be the heroes of their stories too. And that's what Heartdrum is doing. So it's such an exciting imprint to be a part of. And I'm so excited to be able to do things like all of our cover artists are Native. All of our voice actors who do audiobooks are Native. We like work really, really closely to uplift other creatives in the communities that we're a part of.
Amazing. And Grace, I mean, you wrote in your bio this you want to write books for Korean Americans that you didn't get to see when you were a teen. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That actually didn't, that realization that sort of passion to write kind of diverse books didn't happen when I first started writing books. And it was a revelation that kind of came to me via an agent. And it was startling to me. I think because I grew up at a time where there wasn't a lot of Korean rep in, or diverse, any kind of diversity in books as representation. I think, Jen, when you were talking about the Babysitters Club being your, that's, yes. And there,
that was a big moment, right?
Yeah, I was going to say that was probably the most diverse book out there in terms of like different families and having an Asian American character on there. But I remember reading like Sweet Valley High, and that was pure, just no diversity at all. And so those are sort of kind of the influence that I had growing up. And when I first started to write, it was actually like looking back, I feel kind of sad saying this, but all my characters were white, because that was what I was used to, and that was what I thought people wanted to read. And I just didn't think any better. And I was truly a product of that kind of upbringing where representation just wasn't there. And I compartmentalized my Asian American stuff to be only Asian American stuff that came from Asia. And then, here in America, it has to all be just, certain type of characters. So it was very, it wasn't as obvious as to me at first. And I went on a writing retreat through the Andrea Brown agency. Why is it Big Sur writing retreat? And it was I'm like, why am I forgetting? It was amazing. And I highly recommend it. And it was one of the agents there, and I was like pitching her my story, and I was just talking to her about it. And I said, my characters are all white. And oh no, I'm sorry. She was actually telling me a story about how there was someone who was not of Indigenous background, but wanted to have this like Indigenous story about her grandmother being a spirit animal, and a lot of appropriation that was super not aware to this author. And I think the agent was really trying to kindly tell her that this is not something you can actually do at all. Like, absolutely not. That's like a no-go. And that kind of got me thinking. I was like, well, I'm writing people that are not, of my background, right? I was like, oh crap. And so I told her, and she is this, she's a lovely blonde, white woman. And she told me that's fine, because that is kind of, it doesn't work. It's not the same the other way. It's like appropriating from a marginalized community. And that's something that that's what we're more focused on. And I told her, I said, I'm writing white characters because when I was younger, those were the characters. That's what I thought I was white for the longest time in my life. And that's just kind of how I saw myself. And she just stopped and she looked at me and she goes, I'm interested in that story. And that really just turned a light bulb in my head. Like, what am I doing here? And it really was a very pivotal moment in my writing career as an author, because from then on, I started to be a little bit more like, it was kind of like I had to dip my toe in it to see what it was like. I made the main character now is Asian, or everyone else is still white, but the main character is Asian. And then I just went on from there, and I still can't believe that my debut is like look at the cover, it's all Koreans. And not only that, it's set in Korea, so I did a real 180 there. And I think, and I will say, I had many conversations with my agent and my editor and my film agent, that I was concerned that this was only going to draw a certain crowd. It's still, I have a lot of internalized racism from growing up, and like the representation, and a lot of those things are still something that I'm very aware of. But, it was very encouraging to hear from my team that this is something that needs to be done. And, that support and that confidence that I didn't have clearly, was really something that helped me to feel confident about the content that I wanted to write about. And really, I don't want to just write about, this is about Koreans and only Koreans. It's, I get that this is, maybe my mission for my, this was something that I had to get over and to want to write for my debut. But in general, I just want to write books that show different like a real accurate portrayal of what America looks like today. And that does include, Korean American people as the lead. So I think this was a very long-winded way of saying representation does matter, but it does. And this is very personal because we grew up in a time where there wasn't a lot of representation. And for the future generations, like I can clearly see how it impacts a person's views of themselves. So yeah, so hopefully there's more of, yeah.
Hashtag so relatable.
Yeah.
So relatable. Like I'm just nodding here, being like, yeah. I mean, so I have thoughts on representation. I also have the same kind of story, so my skin is white and I read as a white woman unless I disclose I'm Indigenous. I also grew up in the Canadian education system, which is like deeply colonial and is deeply interested in making sure that there are fewer and fewer Indigenous people as things move forward, right? So like my grandmother was white passing and married a white man and didn't disclose that she was Métis, and that sort of like came out after her death. So like I wrote about trying to like not be Indigenous in the Summer of Bitter and Sweet. That's sort of like where Lou's background starts, is she lies a lot and pretends to be like a Ukrainian Catholic on the Canadian prairies. And this is one of like the foundational lies that gets her in trouble with her friends and gets her in trouble with her family. So like that kind of tension of like, how do you feel confident writing about your background when you feel like no one wants to read about it? I think that's changing. I teach fiction writing at the university level, and I'm starting to see like my marginalized students come in and be like, no, I'm going to do this. And like, they are not going through the same like trauma that Grace and I went through to like get to the point where we could do this, which I love. I'm so happy for them. They're like, the second point about representation is like, yeah, representation matters. Like Grace's cover and my cover, like this, it matters because people get to see people who look like them in public spaces. And that is a big deal to start breaking down the idea that you can't write about like your marginalized experience. Because look, we see it represented. But then there's the flip side to representation, and that is, I am never going to be able to write a Native character who like represents for everyone. I'm never going to be able to write a queer character who represents for everyone. It's always going to be contextual and specific to that character. So when people come into your book and they're like, I'm going to learn all about nativeness from this book, right? Like that is not the representation I'm doing. I can't give you that. Grace cannot give you like access to the Korean experience through Grace's novel. Grace can give you like one family. So like representation becomes a trap when people are like, this isn't my experience of being demisexual, or this isn't my experience of being Indigenous, or this isn't my Korean American experience in Korea. So like, I just want us all to be really aware of that like representation matters, but careful, like it can be used as a weapon, and you're not going to find like full representation ever.
I agree with that. And I struggled with that too, because I did not want to there's a huge weight and responsibility in writing, such, a character, a marginalized character, because it's no culture, no background, no sexual orientation is a monolith. There's so much diversity within diversity. And in fact, my next book that is supposed to come out next summer is about another Asian American, surprise, is about another Korean American who actually doesn't feel like she fits that Korean American mold too. So there's so much diversity within diversity. And I think that that's why it's important that there's just more of these marginalized background stories, because then it'll just show you, because before it, like you were saying, you know, when I wrote this book, actually, and I finally told my parents I was coming out with a book, they were like, oh, is this like Joy Luck Club? And I was like, really? Is that the only Asian story? You know, like, come on, like, is that it? You know, so I'm just, you know, my heart is so happy because there are so many more books coming out just in every, you know, every corner, that is just help leveling the playing field, because it's a huge responsibility, like Jen was saying, for one person to be writing that aspect of, you know, this culture or that background, or and so just, I think the only thing that we can do is just keep allowing space for these on the bookshelf, you know, other stories.
Absolutely. We got millions of white people stories, so it's time to add to the canon, if you will. We have a question from an audience member, Kip. They say, congratulations on your debuts. So excited about both of these books. What are you looking forward to most about finally getting these books out into the world? And I would add, what are you most nervous about?
Grace, do you want to go first? Because you,
Oh my God,
debut first.
Like, what are we not nervous about? I don't know what kind of, I feel like that question is, yeah.
That was a great deferral, Jen.
I know.
I've been practicing.
What are we looking forward to? That's a good question. Honestly, because I think it's like, it's been building up to it for so long. I'm just ready for it to happen already. I think that's just, I'm ready for it to just, and I mean, I'm not just talking about the actual release, because it's actually in books. It's weird. It's in bookstores already. What I mean is like the official, like the launch and the, you know, all that debut stuff, celebrating around this is now out in the world. Because I think while this is a monumental experience in every author's life that should be celebrated, cherished, and, you know, paid attention to, I also think it is one aspect of what I would hope to accomplish as an author. I do want a career that is more than just my debut. So I'm hoping, and what I'm looking forward to is to just being able to just have a career in writing and celebrating many different, hopefully, God willing, many different projects, and not just the one, because it's kind of like, for those of you who are parents might know, it's kind of like having one child and just only focusing on that child. It can be much sometimes, and I would love to have more, and it's only for people who want to have more children, you know. One child works for some people, but if you want to have more children, I think that's what it feels like for me. It's like, I want to celebrate this one child, yes, but I do want to have more children. So more book babies and more celebrations. And, you know, the things that I'm nervous about, I think I'm a worrier. So I think leading up to it, I processed a lot of like, what if this book is going to fail? What if people hate it? A lot of that kind of stuff. And, you know, I think to talk, because I'm a worrier, I've already thought about the things that to like ad nauseum, and really just have come to the determination that those fears are never going to go away. And just my coping mechanism for that is to just pour myself into future projects that I'm excited about. So that's where I'm at right now.
Great. Jen?
So I am excited for, well, no, I'm going to start with the thing I'm nervous for, because then it like will let the excited thing be like the end statement. I, at one point recently, worried myself so well that I was like, this is the first YA book from the Heart Drum imprint. And if it doesn't do well, I will have crushed the entire imprint. Like, all of this is on my shoulders. I am gonna bring down something amazing. So I got really anxious about like performing so that other writers can keep writing, which is like, that's bananas. It's not all on me. I have a wonderful publicist and sales team who are like doing their job to make sure that this book gets out there. But yeah, I am a worrier, team warrior right here. And I think that writing is such a personal and private act. And I think of it as a private, like reading is a private act. sure, like you can totally talk to people who've read the book after, that's fine and cool, but like the actual experience of sitting down and reading is kind of personal. So I feel like I did a really personal thing. I'm an introvert. I fake extrovertism when I'm around people, but I'm a true introvert. And this is like, shh, take the book and go sit quietly in a corner and enjoy your emotional experience, right? So like that versus publicizing a book, they don't fit well in my brain. What I am really excited for, and I got like a little sneak peek of this yesterday at Y'all West. HarperCollins had a book truck, like a food truck, but a book truck, and they were giving out ARCs. And at 11 a.m., they were giving out copies of The Summer of Bitter and Sweet, like teens and kids. And I watched kind of creepily from like behind a garbage can because I was too anxious to like go up to them. And it was just so exciting to see people like being passed my book and to grab it and to like hold it to their heart. So for me, like I want to be on public transit one day and see someone reading my book. Like that is the moment that I'm excited for. I'm excited for the moment where I get to like spy into the tiny little private life of someone consuming my novel. That's what I want.
It's amazing. So unfortunately, we're almost out of time. This has been such a fun conversation. Just to end, I would love to hear what you both are working on. And then we have a question from an audience member about, are you on social media? Where can we keep up with your work? So that, I would love it if you would post your handles into the chat, because I think it's a little hard to get them when you're reading them off. So to that end, yeah, your socials, which I can see you're putting into the chat there. So Lucy, you can see them there, and everyone else. And then, yeah, tell us what you're working on next. Jen, why don't we start with you?
So book 2 for HarperCollins doesn't have a title yet, but I fondly call it the pizza book. So this is the ice cream book, and now I'm writing the pizza book. Apparently, I'm a Taurus, like I love food. So let's just like get that out there. The pizza book takes place over a week. A depressed Native teen sort of teams up with her arch enemy to take down capitalism in their small town. And also they are looking for a missing Cree teen that the police have stopped searching for. So like 2 storylines, kind of a mystery, and like, let's take down capitalism. Yay.
Got it. See, feeds into, you can fit a lot into a YA novel. A lot is going on there. Grace, what about you?
Yeah, my book 2 is being worked on right now, and it should be coming out sometime next year. I think we're aiming for summer 2023. The title I think is going to stay, but we haven't really discussed it, so I won't talk about the title. But this is actually the story that I was working on, before that no one wanted, but I actually think, sadly, people do want it now. And I say sadly because I think a lot of the, there's been a lot in terms of Asian hate crimes that have happened in the recent years that wasn't present when I was writing the book, that deals with, so this book is about a girl who, like I said, is Korean American, but also feels kind of in that in between where she's clearly not white, but she doesn't feel 100% accepted into even the Korean American community. And so for her to kind of find out her where she fits in, and if it's, I think the point is that you don't always have to fit in to a particular box. And she is a musician who is also trying to find space for singer-songwriters that look like her in the American mainstream music industry. And so there's a lot to unpack there. But, I always try to bring levity and humor into it, not because I think it's a not serious topic, but I feel like I still want young readers to relate and to feel connected to the storyline. So we're working on that. I hope I can share more later.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much for being here. I hope that your book launches are amazing, that the sales are amazing, that it's everything you ever wanted, and that your new books come out and are also amazing. So, this isn't the first time. This is the first time, but won't be the last time.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Everyone,
Bye,
and
thank you. Bye.
bye.